the biggest question in my mind was whether his name had been appropriately used. You know, whether John Birch would have been a member of the John Birch Society. I'm Terry Lautz, and I'm the author of John Birch, A Life. Birch wanted to go to China because China loomed so large for young Americans who were looking for adventure, who wanted to do something big with their lives, who, if they had a religious background like Birch, might very well have wanted to go to China. Birch arrived in China in July of 1940 at a moment when China had already been at war with Japan for 3 years. Now, Birch had no real background, no real understanding of China, but he did know there was a war on. He went initially to Shanghai, which was still neutral territory. This is a year and a half before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. But he was very free-spirited, very independent, and really very courageous. And so he was just going to see what would happen, and was very committed to winning as many Chinese Christians as he possibly could. And after Pearl Harbor, he volunteered for the U.S. military, feeling that this was the most important thing he could do at that point. He felt that in order to be a good missionary, a good Christian missionary, it was necessary first to help defeat the Japanese. And so it was first things first. He thought it would be most likely that he would be a chaplain, a Christian chaplain. But General Chennault had other ideas for John Birch. He was recruiting young men like Birch who understood the language, who knew the territory, who could live in the field and eat Chinese food, to be military liaison officers with the nationalist armies. These men would be the eyes and ears, so to speak, for Chennault's Air Force, for the fighter pilots and the bombers. And they would relay information back to headquarters, or to the air bases in southern and southwest China. At the end of the war, Birch has been in China for 5 years. This is August of 1945, when the Japanese surrender. And Birch is expecting to be sent home. He is really at the end of his rope, physically and emotionally, but he's sent on a final mission to North China, and he's approaching the city of Suzhou. And the communist forces, which have been building strength through the war, are fighting the Japanese, who have been told not to surrender to anybody except the nationalists. And Birch encounters a communist detachment, and he's ordered to surrender his weapon. He's carrying a .45 revolver on his hip. And he refuses. He says, "What are you, bandits?" Insults the Chinese. One thing leads to another. He's shot and killed. The irony of this is tremendous, because Mao Zedong has just at the same time flown from Yan'an to Chongqing for talks with Chiang Kai-shek to see if they can avoid civil war. And General Wiedemeyer, the commanding general of the American forces in China, is informed about the death of an American officer. By this time, Birch is a captain. And he arranges a meeting with Mao and says, "Mr. Mao, I have information about the death of Captain John Birch. What does this mean?" And Mao says, "I don't know anything about this. If this is true, it must have been an accident, and I apologize." And we learn later that Mao is furious about the way he's been lectured by Wiedemeyer. He's been treated badly by Wiedemeyer. Wiedemeyer says, "I can go anywhere, anytime I want with American forces." And so this may have been the beginning of the end of any chance for further cooperation between the American forces and the Chinese Communist forces. So it's something of a turning point, but at the same time, it was a footnote in World War II history. I think, though, that Birch's life also represents something of a parable, if you will, or a commentary on American relations, insofar as it is a reflection of three impulses that have driven and have represented U.S. thinking about China in the mid-20th century, and I think to a large extent still today. One of those impulses is religion, and it's the impulse to change China, to make China just like us. The second impulse is the military, it's the war, it's to protect China, but not to necessarily accept China on its own terms. It's China as the adversary to the Japanese, or China as the opposite of the USSR, the Soviet Union. The third facet or aspect of this impulse is, I think, the impulse to reject China. And this is where Birch's name is appropriated by Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, as a symbol of opposition to the People's Republic of China, Communist China. So he becomes a symbol of the Cold War. So my conclusion is that John Birch would not have been a member of the John Birch Society. He was far more committed to religion and being a missionary than he was to politics. It was very clear from one of the letters he wrote that he had no respect, no love lost for either the nationalists or the communists. He really did have great concern for the Chinese people. And I think his name was misappropriated and misused, and his life was misrepresented. So in many ways, my book is an effort to rescue his identity from this misuse of history.